Hello, Montana. I'm Daniel Larson, and I'm running for U.S. Senate. Trying to go around and capture what Montana voters truly care about so I can represent them when I get to the United States Senate. The theme of my campaign is STOP, which stands for See the Other Perspective. I want to do this campaign different. I want it to stay small. I want it to be focused on who I am as a person. If you have anything you're concerned about, reach out. Let's have a conversation. So hi, I'm Dan Larson. I'm running for U.S. Senate as a Republican in the state of Montana. I'm challenging U.S. Senator Steve Daines for the Republican nomination June 2nd. I've got a race that I think I can win. And yeah, I'm here talking with Rick. You want to introduce yourself?
Please, thank you. Yeah, I'm Rick Shepherd. I'm running for Nevada's 2nd Congressional District to represent Northern Nevada. And I am in the midst of a primary, got about half a dozen or so competitors to get past. And then in November, go up against Mark Amodei. And you can find out more about him at markamodei.com because yeah, he didn't bother to buy his own name. So Rick Shepherd for Congress. And I'm really looking forward to having a chat with you about energy policy. It's literally the answer to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from healthcare to energy to environment to foreign wars, everything comes down to energy independence and our ability to live our lives on this planet in a way that doesn't destroy it.
Yeah, and Rick and I kind of got together. I reached out to him. We're both members of the Universal Basic Income Caucus. My understanding is you're a bit of a Bernie supporter. Is this correct?
That's true. I was a state delegate for Bernie Sanders in Las Vegas in 2016, down where no chairs were thrown, and I've been a supporter of him ever since. I was faced by a superdelegate who, while shaking my hand, told me how he was going to cheat me, and then proceeded to do so. The rigging of the 2016 Democratic primary was blatant. We know it from exit polls. We know it from admissions by Dawn of Brazil, admissions from Tom Perez. Elizabeth Warren said she knew that it was being rigged. Yeah, we had Tulsi Gabbard stepped down from her position at the DNC, endorsed Senator Sanders, and started raising hell about election integrity over it. And then in a court of law, the DNC lawyers got away with it by admitting to it and saying they get to because they're a private corporation. So yeah, I not only am I a supporter of Bernie because I appreciate his policies, I've been through that war with him now, and I have a great deal of contempt for the 1%, the owner class, the rigors of the environment that we're coming up in. And this is why we do this, right? This is why we run.
Yeah. So I think you and I are both united in the fact that we're intending to be very anti-establishment candidates. I think based off of our previous discussions, I think we share a similar understanding of where U.S. politics is. I think you and I could agree on several issues on how we drive the conversation forward. And I think this is a great format where we could show the electorate exactly how negotiations should be working between people on the other side of the aisle. So
yeah, absolutely. It's not a partisan issue. You come at the problem with solutions.
Right. So solutions. There's a lot of meat and bones to get working on. And I think the overall theme that I would like to just highlight is we need to start removing some of the corporate voices from these conversations. And with that being said, today's topic is thorium.
Yeah.
Thorium reactors. So I would say that I was relatively, like I had investigated the issue a little bit based off of Andrew Yang's campaign, went to a couple of different websites, looked at different models of reaction. But until I talked to you, I definitely wasn't as jacked up about this idea. But in the last 24 hours doing my research, I'm like, holy cow, we've got something substantial in our hands. So you want to introduce kind of what your plans for thorium are? Because I think that they might be a model that we should really investigate.
Thank you. I appreciate this. So liquid fluoride thorium reactor, LFTR, I'll refer to them as lifter. So that just sort of sets the ground. There have been a number of nuclear solutions proposed. And of course, we're all familiar with like Fukushima Daiichi and 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. And this is not that. This is a technology that we proved in the 1960s through the molten salt reactor experiment was walk away safe, is non-proliferating, and it was considered to be a moonshot victory at the time. And the only reason we didn't pursue it was because it is so good at doing what it does that it doesn't produce the garbage that they needed to reprocess and turn into weapons. This has always been a weapons program, but ultimately to bring a detail to thorium as an energy solution beyond all the others, there is no other energy solution out there, not the green ones, not the dirty ones. There isn't another one out there that provides a way for us to also dispose of that 80,000 metric tons of nuclear waste that they want to bury in Yucca Mountain. That's my state. Even if it's not my district, it's still my world. I got to care about what happens here. And 80,000 metric tons for 100,000 years is a big ask. We can do much better than simply throw this away.
Yeah. And Yucca Mountain, just for people don't know, every time a presidential cycle comes through Nevada, they're talking about Yucca Mountain. It's huge in Nevada politics. It's a proposed site where they're taking the spent nuclear fuel in the United States of America, which we have a huge issue with, and putting it in a mountain, Nevada, right?
Absolutely. So the proposal is that with a liquid fluoride thorium reactor with lifters, we can consume this nuclear waste. We can consume upwards of 99% of it. And it's going to take us decades to burn through all of this. So this is a fuel source that will last us for quite a while.
Okay.
What we will have as a result is the clean energy that comes from running lifters, a tremendous amount of waste heat that is a perfect suit for desalination, as well as for engaging in the chemistries necessary for synthesizing fuels. We can make dimethyl ether and ethanol and ammonia and fertilizer, and all through carbon capture. And this is all part of the solution towards a green economy that liberates us from hydrocarbon extraction. We're in 7 wars right now, and not one of them can be explained away as anything other than conflict and resource extraction. If we actually cared about terrorism, we would be going after Boko Haram in Africa. But obviously, there's no resources there, so we don't know.
Let's limit some of the geopolitics conversation just so we can kind of nail it in, so people don't attack us on a couple of these issues. But
yeah, you're right.
But that's a good point. But the lifters is just so I can dial it to the way that I understand it, based off of the information that you've provided me, some of the research in the field. The way I understand it, and the way I think the public needs to understand it, is there is a technology out there through thorium that would actually disrupt our energy markets for essentially permanently.
Yes.
Although, we have
there, at the risk of taking this back to a political, if you tie carbon capture and carbon sequestration to some sort of tax subsidy and remediation, where you pay people as a federal government to put carbon away, you've now introduced a business model that fits right in line with oil and gas industry. And if they can capture from the atmosphere and sequester into subsurface rock and let it turn into limestone, then they have a potential business model. And who better on earth than Shell and Chevron to go find appropriate geologies, drill a hole and pump a fluid?
So I think that there's a lot of opportunities. So I would agree with you that based off of what I've seen, thorium reactions have the possibility to give us an energy outlook that would replace carbon fuels entirely. And then you were talking about the energy outlook in Nevada. So Nevada has a water issue. So let's tie this into water.
All right. So once you have a lifter, once you have an energy source, you can now hook it up to any of the number of machines that we're already good at building. We're great at building desalination, but the problem is it takes a great deal of energy to do it. Once the energy is no longer a factor, once you've got clean, abundant energy, the solutions have been readily available. Desalination is in place all over the world, and it proved effective. And we've been tapping Nevada's underground sources for generations, and there is simply nowhere else to drill. Right. This is a state where everything drains internally, and a lot of it is high mountain desert. There are underground water sources, but we've been negligently sucking away at those for decades. And now the water tables have dropped in places. That affects the migrations of native species, that affects indigenous peoples movements, that of course affects the environment. And we've got climate change to contend with. And it's not like we're going to stop growing or stop having industry. And if you think that your residential consumption is a concern, know
Yeah.
that the water you use as a residential consumer is maybe 10 to 15% of the total water usage. So even if
Hmm.
you and I became leaders of the minimalist water usage movement, there is still so much more beyond us that we cannot compensate for by trying to drill another hole and pull another puddle of water out. So desalination is our only way forward. And when we're talking about a country that already has Flint, Michigan to contend with,
Hmm.
as well as all the rest of our infrastructure being crumbling, the idea of a nationwide infrastructure plan that includes plumbing that, let's face it, we've been good at for thousands of years. I mean,
Yeah.
there's Roman plumbing that's still
Right.
working to this day.
But
So
there's billions of dollars that left to spend in public
mhm.
infrastructure for water, and I just wanted to make a call out just because I don't think people realize the seriousness of water in Nevada. Nevada's population is actually you can't live in Nevada long term without solving for water. I don't think,
Yeah.
and it's driven some of the more conservative cattle conversations in the state
Mhm.
as far as the competition for feed resources with your agricultural sector. Even though they're a small percentage of your
Mhm.
overall economy, it's generated a lot of sort of right wing sentiment as far as grazing. So there's already fighting over water in Nevada, and you're having a
Has been.
consistent conversation about tapping some water resources, spending billions of dollars in infrastructure to get water moved from north in the state down south. Is
Mhm.
this
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, the Southern Nevada Water Authority has proposed, I think, every year now to
Yeah.
put in a pipeline, and every year it gets shot down, but who knows, one of these times that it might work.
And so we truly are talking about, so this just so everybody's aware, is the regulatory environment hasn't promoted thorium correctly yet. So this is, you would be promoting the liquid fuel version of thorium, right? With
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
with the molten salt reactor. So
Yeah.
everybody
That's
needs
part of the
to, yeah,
sorry. Well, the regulations that are in place now are regulations geared towards technologies that don't translate to what we're doing. You
yeah,
know, the regulation talked about how to handle the solid fuel. There isn't any. You know,
right,
how to test a pressure vessel. There isn't one.
right.
So the rules of engagement aren't even appropriate.
Yeah, so I see it like this. So you have a technology that's so disruptive that we have to fundamentally make sure that we tie this to the fundamental elements of our democracy and then the fundamental elements of what we're talking about with UBI. So
Mhm.
I propose that we have to do UBI first to have a really good energy conversation because thorium, with its potential, has the ability to change power infrastructure in the state, in both of our states. It has the power to really change the dynamics in some very large industries. And already you can see within Senate hearings that there definitely is politicized scientific positions on this that try to perpetuate the is a slow transition, I guess, is one
Mhm.
of the conversations where they're proposing taking the existing solid fuel model and then transitioning. But it seems like they're just not even opening up the community to really the potential of thorium. Plus, there's a lot of intellectual property that's going to other countries, so people
Mhm.
need to be really aware that if we don't do thorium, China's going to do thorium. So,
Yeah, it's already being developed in other countries, and like I said, we already did it in the '60s. So this is we're
mhm.
not breaking new ground here.
Yeah.
In fact, it's more of a chemical reaction than anything. It's not like you're containing an explosion.
Hmm.
So we've done it and can do it and will and should do it again in the very near future. Uh, with respects to the water, that's a national thing, right?
Hmm.
And so we don't have to worry about one state versus another state having some reason to have an issue with this kind of an infrastructure plan.
Yep.
Everybody gets to benefit from this.
Yep.
And along that same vein, when we build these lifters, when we start providing power at an industrial level through something that's sustainable, we
Hmm.
could do the same thing with power. And
Yep.
I'm thinking about it from the perspective of global competitiveness. Let's say,
Hmm.
for example, you're an aluminum manufacturer. You basically take dirt, run electric currents through it, and then make aluminum on the backside.
Yep.
Aside from labor, and in fact, probably more than labor, your biggest cost to input is electricity.
Yep, and that goes for agricultural producers as well. It's usually their number two, but their number one is petrochemicals. So theoretically, we're
Exactly.
changing that at the same time. So this could change water, petrochemicals, primary inputs for agriculture. Plus, one valley over, people have to recognize from you is the San Joaquin Valley, right?
Nearby.
Yeah, so it's like the we're solving a lot of these issues all with one fell swoop. So your proposal would be to do a thorium reactor development in Nevada, right?
I would be proposing to do them absolutely everywhere, all the time, all day, every
Uh-huh.
day. But yeah, we got to start somewhere. And I also don't want to shortchange the truth of the fact that we can synthesize our own fuels, right?
Yep.
Because the gasoline replacement and the
Yep.
diesel replacement and the critical piece of this intermediary step. We're not going to all run out tomorrow and buy Teslas.
Right.
We're not going to have electric semis tomorrow. We're not even
Yeah.
going to have fully electric trains for a while. There's
And
going to
plus we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it with the existing lithium resources as well, right?
actually, we don't need a great deal of lithium, and Nevada just found out that we're sitting on even more than we thought we had.
Oh,
Something like
okay.
20% of the world's lithium is in our
Is in
backyard.
Nevada. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the new iterations of batteries are going to use less and perhaps even none. And once you go grid scale batteries, then you start looking at things like flow batteries that don't even need those kinds of conflict elements or difficult. Plus, lastly, the stuff's recyclable, so we can
Hmm.
ultimately get it back. But yeah, if you've got your energy solutions, your liquid fuels covered as well, now that intermediary step is not damaging the planet. It's part of a carbon neutral cycle. So every time you go to the gas station and fill up your car that still runs on gas, you're
Right.
just recycling the carbon that was already captured once, as opposed to pumping new stuff out.
Hmm. Plus, you have essentially. So let's just talk about some of the possibilities. So,
Mhm.
um, thorium is abundant in the environment.
Yeah,
The world's power supply is like 5,000 metric tons of thorium,
ish.
something like that. Yeah, which
I would
is
like to actually see that go up because that would mean that we're doing industrious things. But
yeah.
it's a mindset because people have to conflate the idea of using more power with generating more emissions or creating more waste and damage. But I
Hmm.
believe that we're not going to be able to diet our way out of this problem. To get in
Hmm.
front of this, we're going to have to throw a lot of power at it.
Yeah.
We have been using power that was millions of years in the making to make
Right.
carbon and oil and all these others. So it's going to take a tremendous amount of power to rebring those things back into the fold.
Okay. So a tremendous amount of political power, right? Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
I'm actually meant electrical power.
Oh,
I actually
electrical
meant, yeah.
power.
If
Yeah.
you look at the total gigawatt power consumption across the planet right now, we could replace it with thorium. Just wave a magic wand, replace it all with thorium,
Yep.
and that's a wonderful step forward. But that doesn't solve the problem of getting rid of the garbage that we have. That doesn't solve the problem of removing the current non-electric systems out of circulation, the gas engines and the diesel engines. Those are
Hmm.
all yet to be mitigated. So, but
Yeah.
it takes us on a path that none of the other energy solutions do.
Okay.
Even fusion doesn't get rid of the garbage
Yeah.
directly. And although we would have the energy to be able to make synthesized fuels from it, that's always 20 years away, right?
You're right. And we hit on this briefly, but it also through the nuclear cycle, we can be recycling existing nuclear waste, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also when we go through the burning of the thorium, we get byproducts that come out of it, like medicines. There
Yep.
are some nuclear isotopes that are used in cancer treatments, for example, have to be generated in a timely manner. They can't sit on a shelf for a period of time, so they have to be used and consumed in short order. And in order to do so, you need to be able to readily create them, and lifters can. NASA has been out of a particular breed of plutonium that they use to power their deep space missions. We've been buying that stuff from Russia for decades. We
Hmm.
can make more of it for ourselves. It's all part of being independent. That doesn't mean that you have to be opposed to someone else. You just need to be independent of them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is part of it.
Yeah. So like, just so everybody is more familiar too. So like in the state of Montana, our power distribution is kind of monopolized. And then their 20-year energy plan, just, it doesn't even include any renewables. Right now, we're slated for the next 20 years to just have a higher and higher percentage of natural gas consumption.
Hmm.
So our energy sector is lined up to essentially transition from oil into natural gas. And I think that this is the same sort of geopolitical environment that we're perpetuating. And
Mm-hmm.
so you think that we can actually get a thorium solve within your first term, right?
That's my plan. That's
Yeah.
If you don't fight for everything you want, if you come into it having already assumed that you've lost, then why even show up to fight?
Yeah. Well, what I
So
would propose, is this technology is so disruptive that we need to make sure that we have honest voices in the conversation. And I would propose that we start a caucus, the Thorium Caucus, but there's a couple of just rules of collaboration, I guess, in this Thorium Caucus. I think that the entry into the Thorium Caucus should come from universal basic income, just because that would be the leveled playing field that would be needed to, I guess, create the political will in the conversation. What do you think about that?
I think that anyone that's on board with one is likely to be able to be swayed by the other. I don't. If you want to make one contingent upon the other, okay. I don't know that it's necessary, because they're both beneficial, but they're independent. And it might be easier to get a bunch of Republicans on board with the idea of building reactors than it is to give them paychecks. But then again, right now and today, in the last week, we've seen plenty of evidence to the contrary. So what do I know?
Well, I never underestimate people to heavily politicize the conversation, and by funneling it that way, I think some of the conversations, because just looking at the coal industry, so in the state of Montana, losing a couple hundred jobs at a coal plant has been a big political, for the last 12, 13 years, has been a big political landmine, or essentially, or a source of control. And so people usually take like this job loss or this industry loss, and we're talking about a technology that'd be so disruptive that it would potentially even displace all the way down to hydroelectric infrastructure. It would change our climate change conversation, in which there's already like a spooling up of industry on some of these solves. So we just talked about natural gas for a little bit, and it's definitely spooled up throughout our nation. And so there's going to be a lot of political pushback when these companies start to be affected, similar to the same way that we're seeing within the nuclear sector. There's nearly $1 billion worth of development costs on next generation nuclear reactors, in which they're abandoned technologies. So I think I'm thinking that the industry would come out in support of perpetuating some sort of iterative model of the existing state. So we might have to fight against that a little bit when we get to Congress.
Yeah. It's always, yes, we can incrementally change.
Yeah. Well, but there's some bad technologies that are out there that we should just go ahead and assume that we're going to mothball and pursue thorium the second that it's ready to come online. My understanding is we can't currently do development under 1 megawatt. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not, but it wouldn't surprise me that there's any number of regulatory constrictions in place. I do think that if we position this correctly, that the oil and gas industry can recognize how this is how they leapfrog into a clean 21st century, and basically could legitimately greenwash their reputation.
Yeah.
And if ExxonMobil gets in the business of capturing carbon, suddenly they're the good guys.
Yeah, so the sooner we can propose a plan and give everybody an energy future. So say we were writing the 20-year energy future of the United States of America together, the sooner that we could get that into a framework, the sooner people would be making financial investments. And then we can come up with I see it as we have to come up with a plan to spool down these other sectors as well.
Oh, yeah. if you if like we mentioned when we were speaking before about the idea of retiring the coal miners, it's it would be in our collective best interest to allow these people to no longer have that career path.
Right.
You know, but
Yeah.
to say, go learn to code is nonsense.
Yeah.
The idea that that we need to, oh, it's your problem that your industry is now obviated
Hmm.
is ridiculous. And we've shown that not even multi-billion-dollar corporations genuinely have any bootstraps to pull them up by. So maybe we the people need to take care of we the people.
Yeah, and I'm having a discussion with Blair from Oregon
Yeah.
on small business innovation. If you want to be a participant in that discussion, I think that is a good follow up with what we're talking about with the potential of retiring coal sector jobs or energy jobs. And then really distributing entrepreneurship throughout our culture and our communities.
Yeah. Can you imagine the kind of creativity that we would unleash if we liberated tens of thousands of Americans
Uh-huh.
from their current economic situation,
Yeah.
their threat that their industry is on its way out? And once we appreciate the idea of retiring an industry and retiring the people that are participants,
As a
it'll be a
goal,
lot.
even. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the robots taking our job is going to be something we celebrate. Ultimately,
Uh-huh.
the idea that your career path got obviated is something you're going to look forward to. And there are some groups that should be on our side about many things, but they have this need to be opposed. I'll give you an example. um, I love labor unions, and I do
Yep.
everything I can to support the right of people to work, which is ironically the idea of opposing right to work legislation. Uh,
Right. Hey,
but
well, the GOP is really good at naming things, and
oh yeah,
so
yeah, they're
it's hard.
fantastic.
Yeah.
You want something that's
Yeah.
garbage? It's got to sound. It's got a
Yeah.
great
It's got to have
Patriot Act.
freedom or
Yeah,
right
yeah,
or yeah.
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 If it's wonderful, it says Glass Steagall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Why are you against the bald eagle legislation? So,
exactly. So take loading docks for example. The
hmm.
gantry crane that is used to haul those shipping containers should have been a robot decades ago. And we know
Yep.
why it isn't. It isn't because unions have done what unions are supposed to
Yeah.
do.
Hmm.
And I don't blame them. I don't fault them. And
Hmm.
in their situation, and right up until the point where we have a guaranteed out, I absolutely am on board with what they're doing. But
Hmm.
if we can retire that job, if
Hmm.
we can now say, you, Mr. Gantry Crane operator, that paycheck you're used to, it's still there. But now, go home, take care of the family, raise the kids. I'm sure mom and dad could use some attention, go back to school, get another job, move, start a business, something. We're going to let
Yeah.
the robot do this thing, and you're now free. If we can provide that soft landing, then we can get like labor unions to be on board with the idea of killing jobs.
Yeah, and I would just propose the universal soft landing of
Mm-hmm.
UBI and then individual accountability. I think a lot of people, when they hear somebody like you say that, it's just like, okay, well, are we paying union pensions for people to not work? And, something viscerally is upsetting. I think the existing paradigm of just some of our conversations around work and the value of work leads to certain things. So, like in communist China, they have situations where they're parking backhoes and digging things by hand just to keep
Yeah,
people occupied. And I don't think we want to live in a world where that is perpetuated, right?
I agree completely. And that comes from, in my opinion, the inability to separate uh, value or purpose
Uh-huh.
from work,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And there's work that needs to be done, but then you as a human being have value through your
Yep.
purpose. I volunteer, I do activist
Yep.
work, I do all kinds of things that give me purpose. Not one of those pays me. We raise
Right.
guide dogs for the blind. That costs money, but it gives me purpose, and I find value in it. It provides value to our community and to the rest of humanity. So
Hmm.
a universal basic income that comes from my perspective as the consumer vapor, but I turn around and give back in a way that
Hmm.
is also vapor, right?
Hmm.
There's no commerce involved, but I'm absolutely benefiting from and giving benefit to.
Hmm.
By separating the idea of worth from work, we can get to the heart of the matter, which is that you as a human being have something important to do. Maybe you don't even know what it is yet.
Hmm.
Maybe it'll change later, but you're probably not doing it right now, doing that job you hate.
Yeah.
And we can do better than this.
Well, I like to think of it like this: like nobody stops playing Monopoly just because they get $200 every time they pass go.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I think we're all motivated in our own ways to do our own things, but the things that we're doing that are super important don't usually have a monetary incentive. So raising our children versus the government raising our children,
Exactly.
these are the types of things, supporting
Yeah.
multi-generations and things like that.
I envision I'm working towards a Star Trek universe. I envision a post-scarcity society such that the idea of the economy is more like gambling at that point. It's something you do if you want. It's fun.
Yeah.
But between now and then, there's going to be commerce. There's going to be a need to exchange money for goods and services, and the system we have in place clearly doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Half of America is poor. Half of America couldn't afford a $400 emergency. 45 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured.
Mm-hmm.
500,000 are going to go bankrupt because they had the audacity to get sick and survive, while 45,000 are just going to die instead. This is the model that we have. It clearly doesn't work as it is. And if you start looking at state by state how well they're doing, some metrics like wealth and income inequality, you go up to Alaska that has a universal basic income in the form of a permanent fund, and you'll find that of the 50 states, they have the lowest rate of wealth and income inequality. That's just one of many metrics, but that's also a metric that's tied towards the very thing that UBI is intended to address.
Right. So like I think just starting with just different metrics is a non-monetary, probably value-added solve that you and I would both agree to when we got to Washington, correct?
Well, and yes, and also think about every person that I had as a role model or as someone important in my life growing up was someone around the house that was not getting paid to do what they were doing.
Right.
Yeah. Everyone that's been there that has been instrumental in me developmentally was also not compensated in the path of doing so. And we, the people, should appreciate that we need to raise ourselves individually as well as we can. And these resources let you do that. You go back a couple hundred years ago, you could realistically go out and plot your own path with the skill sets that you developed growing up. You knew how to hunt, you knew how to fish, you knew how to basic sewing, some carpentry. You could go and exist. You're not only not equipped with those skill sets today, even if you were, you're not allowed to participate in that manner. There is nowhere to go remove yourself from the system. You are born into and necessitated by a system that you must participate in. And if you're going to make me play a game and then not provide me the tools necessary to do so, you're setting me up for failure. And when we look at the bankruptcies and all the other items that I just mentioned, it's pretty clear that a lot of us are failing. And so a universal basic income goes a long way towards giving people the resources they need to be able to continue to interact in the system that we've developed.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that we've discovered a couple of things that we're definitely uniform on. I think we're both similar in thorium and then in universal basic income. What do you think might be some of the things that we might have to negotiate a little bit? It could be state to state. It could be, I don't know, things you're passionate on.
Well, obviously we've not touched on yet the Medicare-for-All, and we mentioned it briefly yesterday, and there was some hesitation from you on that one. So that would be something we could talk about.
Well, could you agree with me that no matter how you feel about Medicare-for-All, that you would put universal basic income as a higher priority?
I think, yeah. I think because with a basic income, you could put that towards the healthcare if you needed. It's a multi-purpose tool as opposed to a single service tool. But understand that's a Sophie's choice if I ever had one.
Because, well, I see it like this, and maybe this will help. So I see it like universal basic income first, and then we can actually in the same legislative year. So we're talking about next year in January, we can start working within the framework of the ACA to increase price transparency. I think that maybe if you, me, a couple of other independent voices actually made it there, we'd have a political will to start kicking the pharmaceutical companies out of the conversation and kicking some of the insurers out of the conversation. And I think that we could deliver a substantially different healthcare model. It's just the only thing I would object to is the federal government picking up a program like like being responsible for everybody's healthcare in the United States of America if the cost is too high.
I get you. So one of the things you mentioned about doing is removing insurance companies from the
Yep.
mix. That's obviously the ultimate first right answer. They are a parasite. There's nothing medically necessary about an insurance company. And the ACA's, among its myriad shortcomings, was the fact that it continues to inject this unnecessary, rapaciously greedy piece into the middle of our healthcare system. I would suggest that you any of the 22 independent studies that have been done, from the Koch brothers all the way on down, they all say that this is going to cost less and save lives.
Mm-hmm.
And if anyone was going to find a way to poke a hole in this, it was going to be the Koch brothers.
The Koch brothers. Well, I understand. I agree that there's $1.7 trillion worth of excessive healthcare spending in this country. It's just, I see it as a multiple legislative action, sort of an iterative solve that we're building stair steps on, so that we actually demonstrate our political will to successfully solve this issue. But I do believe that there is a case for like an altruistic healthcare model that we push down to the state and local level. That might include public funding or grant funding from a federal level to support things like universal preventative health or access to preventative health through a grant-funded public health infrastructure. So there are some things that I think are probably better models.
The idea of grant funding or other public funding for private healthcare facilities and healthcare services is not unlike the universal plan. It really isn't. It's just the way you phrased it. 93%, 94% of healthcare providers already take Medicare. 94% of healthcare providers also take insurance. They're basically, the Venn of those two is almost a perfect circle. The piece that's left out are the specialty, cash only, well-heeled clientele kinds of folks for whom the invoice is the least of their concerns. So the system whereby a healthcare provider provides a service and then submits an invoice to an insurer is already in place. And whether that insurer be Aetna or that insurer be Medicare, there's already a system in place for that to be resolved. So the idea of public dollars coming to a private provider via Medicare is not too dissimilar from the idea of public dollars going to a private provider via grant funding.
Yeah. Well, I guess it. So I had this conversation with Dr. Carolyn Salter, I believe is her name. She's running for U.S. Congress in a very conservative district as a Democrat in Texas, and she's an anesthesiologist. And there was a couple of things that would surprise me by her conversation, and we just got really deep into like medical coding and billing, and she's
talking ICD-9s and ICD-10s.
Yeah, so she's talking about some things that I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds really great. Let's if we kick these people, because I would probe in her like, where's the politics on this? Where's the politics on this? But there's I guess maybe a lot of politics in healthcare, and I think that it would be a huge win to start kicking the voices out, and then we could have this dialogue back and forth with some of the more expert opinions. So it sounds like it's not like I would ever disagree to something that actually made more financial sense. It's just I would never try to sell the government's like sort of paternalistic ability to solve problems and do it well.
I would agree with the notion of paternalism if it was the government that was owning the facility, but that's the VA. This isn't changing the private healthcare model in that you're still going to a doctor who is or is not part of a group, who is or is not part of a hospital, and all of these may or may not be publicly or privately funded. So that doesn't change the capitalist model in any way, other than it frees all of them from having to bill multiple providers. Instead of having to bill Medicare and Medicaid and Aetna and Blue Cross and Blue Shield, it's just always so. But if I could take a second to steelman the opposition's argument for just a second, because it's important that I address the biggest concerns that get brought out, other than the idea of the general fear mongering of government takeover. they will say that Medicare doesn't cover enough stuff,
Uh-huh.
and or Medicare doesn't reimburse at a high enough rate.
Right.
Both of which are legitimate concerns. Both
Well,
of which
actually,
are
with Dr. Salter, she said that her practice doesn't take Medicare because it doesn't cover the cost of overhead. And
exactly
to me, that's just the inefficient pricing model within healthcare. Because,
right.
like, I know from a manufacturing standpoint that anytime you're trying to overload your overhead, you're creating a price scenario that's crazy. But healthcare, I have a huge problem with the fact that it's 18% of GDP, and
Mm-hmm.
it's
And we have
just,
such miserable outcomes. If we had
yeah,
great outcomes,
yeah,
I'd shut up about it.
yeah. No,
If
I
it was
mean,
getting
I
our money's
get you.
worth.
There's definitely a lot of work there. So yeah, continue with your stillman on the
Oh, so
conversation.
their arguments are that it doesn't pay well enough in reimbursement rates, and that it doesn't cover enough. And both of those are factually correct and addressed in the legislation that's already in the House and the Senate. The expansion of coverage to include things that normally would be addressed by like Medicare Part D or other sorts of shoring up
Uh-huh.
secondary coverages. And it eliminates the copays and the deductibles and the premiums that are still associated with healthcare, including Medicare.
Okay.
So those things are addressed in the bill. And furthermore, anything that isn't, at least you know that from here, we, the 330 million Americans who are going to be participants, can collectively demand that it now provide this thing. And we have a hell of a lot better chance of being able to pull that off versus you, Joe Consumer, reaching out to Blue Cross Blue Shield saying, please cover this procedure.
Right. Right. So here's just the basic litmus test of this. So before we had this financial crisis, we were 105% national debt to GDP,
Mhm.
and now we're actually well above this. We're facing a potential credit issue with
Yeah.
the U.S. government. Um, so this is at least $1 trillion in its first year, right?
For which? For Medicare for All?
Yeah.
Oh, it's the 10-year plan is a $32 trillion estimate. But
Uh-huh.
understand that the healthcare that we're currently doing is 47 trillion.
Yeah, so wouldn't there have to be an expansion of the tax base for the government to take this, or is this a premium based model, or how does this work?
There are no premiums, no copays, no deductibles, no out of pocket at point of service. It would be, according to the plans that are put forth in the House and Senate bill, it would be paid for largely through modest increases in payroll taxes, which would be, to most consumers, you're going to save many thousands of dollars a year. And the
Uh,
only people who don't save anything are six-figure and up kinds of people for whom this change is lateral at worst. Uh, the the bill, I believe, mentions some other. Oh no, I was thinking of the other bill was with respect to Wall Street speculations. That was a different set of taxes. But the idea is that your taxes, if they go up, they will go up by much less than what you're paying for in healthcare currently. And
yeah,
that model also guarantees that when you change your employers or are unemployed or unable to go to work because the world is shut down, that you still have coverage. Now, I
yeah,
don't know if you've ever had a situation where you had to get on Cobra. I did that
yeah.
once.
I have, yeah,
That's absurd.
yeah. It cost me like $3,000 for 2 months. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it was about the same price, and the only coverage that it was basically hope you don't die.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
okay, here's where I am initially on this process. It's like I can't really sell to my voters the fact that I would be expanding the federal budget so substantially, especially if the taxes are going to come through like our antiquated sort of tax infrastructure. I would say that the value added tax probably has a ability to kind of ratchet up, and then I think we can probably do value added tax style regulations within different sectors to promote more of an equitable tax model. I would like to propose that if we're going to have an increased tax base, that it should be um, uniform, fair, better than their income tax model. I do support separating healthcare from employment, just because I think that is essentially it's a tax on the employer, and it's generating a
yeah.
whole lot of inefficient sort of employee conversations and
As
stuff.
a
So.
small business owner, I will
Mhm.
save a bunch of money with Medicare for All.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so
Yeah. So if you're
there are
to sell
some
it, yeah.
wins. It's just
Mhm.
how do we truly figure this out so that we have laid out a plan that we're saying is smart enough long term that it's not going to suffer the same problems as our previous legislation, because the ACA was well intended, but it did increase premiums overall. And then, a lot of insurance companies took it as an opportunity to just skyrocket. Yeah. So
you remember
there's a lot of junk insurance that came on the market. Plus, there's a lot of deductibles that went up to $5,000 and $10,000. Right. So a lot of people lost good insurance. Couldn't we have a model in which we use health savings accounts, maybe a government major medical, a premium-based public option that would be cost neutral?
Everywhere that we've tried a two-tier system, it has always worked out that the private side has pushed all of the sick and needy off to the public system and kept the young and healthy and wealthy for themselves. Right. It always works out that way.
Well, I guess that's the existing Walmart model of our economics, right?
Exactly.
Where you just push them onto the public.
The ACA doesn't do anything except socialize in an obfuscated way that very same thing. When you pay a monthly premium to your insurance, that is only a piece of what your insurance company is getting. The ACA, aka our tax dollars, are kicking in the remainder of that premium that we agree to pay to offset so that it looks like you're getting inexpensive health insurance. Mm-hmm. We're already paying for it. We're just allowing some third party to come in and take a little off the top.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's why I was thinking it's a multi-year solve. So the first thing I would think of was I think that it's an entirely inappropriate contract with the insurance providers currently. So you still have public funds. You still have public subsidies going into these premiums, and it's essentially, I think it was a free for all for a lot of people in the industry. So I'd like to really dissect that and make sure that we're there. It sounds like you're saying that the proposed legislation already gets us there.
It does. And I'm not saying it's perfect. There's ways it could make it better. But the ACA, remember, the ACA was created by the Heritage Foundation and then went through Governor Romney.
They're the same ones that are speaking out against the bipartisan recent adoption of the Nuclear Energy Act.
Of course, because they have oil and gas ties.
Yeah. So
it's always about protecting economic interests. The only time I have ever seen a conservative / libertarian / America First sort of kind of group, anytime I've ever seen them do anything that looks legitimately progressive, someone in leadership was personally touched.
Mm-hmm.
It always comes down, Nancy didn't give a damn about cancer until someone she cared about got it.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think candidates like you and I should win, represent the people better. But we need a different campaign finance model. What is your thought? So your competitor has what, 5-6 million? Maybe
something like that. Yeah. Basically unlimited, fantastical sums of money to me.
Yeah. And have you checked out his FEC filings?
I don't. I expect that he's just going to spend whatever he wants and do whatever he wants.
But is it fair to say that he's corporate sponsored? Right?
Oh, absolutely. That's been from day one. Mining, overland shipping, land use. The players have been there all along.
Yeah. Like my competitor, he's got a lot of, natural gas, pharmaceutical, chemical companies, banking. Banking is a huge one.
Wait for him to come out and try to get low interest loans for chemical companies to start using natural gas to strip hydrogen.
Well,
then you'll get paid on all four fronts.
Yeah, I mean, it's on a lot of these issues you see where the public is not really being served very well. Can I ask you to join something, an initiative that might be helpful for the agricultural producers in the state of Montana?
Sure, why not? I like growing food.
Yeah, so Montana is a high water inventory state, so we actually have a competitive advantage in the environmental conversation. So one thing that I would like to do is promote origin labeling on beef. Are you okay with that?
Yes, we'll know if it's coming from Argentina or if we know if it's coming from Kansas.
Or Brazil or Mexico, or I think we'd start off with at least country of origin, because I don't want to pretend that I know exactly where in the U.S. there's also responsible beef production. I would promote a Montana packing industry as well. Would you be on board with that?
I have no problems with transparency in food labeling. You're
Okay.
not going to get any resistance from me on that.
So I could probably get you on board with origin labeling on beef.
Oh yeah. In
Okay.
fact, I would. I'm surprised that it's not already an issue somewhere that I haven't already jumped on. Somebody's
Yeah.
probably proposed it.
Well, we have huge industry consolidations within meat packing, and so those corporate voices are very loud, and I think they're affecting both sides of the aisle. So I would just need other candidates to kind of come with me on a few of these issues to
Yeah.
deliver responsible wins for agricultural producers in the state. All right, so we've almost solved beef. Let's see.
Well, we addressed climate change. We ended foreign wars.
Yes. Oh, so I did. Yeah, foreign wars just from an energy sector perspective. Is there any small wins for Nevada I can help you with?
Small wins, man.
Or just anything that's important that you would like support on beyond what we've talked about?
My focus right now is people's well-being on a day-to-day basis. It's April 1st, and that usually means a joke, but today it means rent. And for a
Yeah,
lot of people, it's not going to get better before it gets worse.
sure.
We're seeing rates of increase of coronavirus infection, not just continuing, but the rates of increase are increasing. We're not in front of this.
Yeah,
Vegas is doing a good job of social distancing. Washoe County is doing a mediocre job, and everyone else is really sucking. And it shows. I'm out here trying to deliver food to people that are febrile, or bring necessities to people that are afraid to get out of the house. There's nothing that I need personally or that I deserve that is in any way worthy of attention beyond what the human suffering I see outside my door. And if there's anything you can do to help the people around you, if you can lift to someone
yeah.
next to you, lift them.
No, I wasn't talking about just you. I was talking about things, but that was a good call out. So I rent currently, and I was like, I wonder how this conversation will go. And I don't mean to make light of how this happened, but
I don't think I took it. That was
so our U.S. senator was, and I support any of the bipartisan efforts that they've made, except for with allocation of resources and how it didn't quite get down to the people where it needed it, because we went through unemployment insurance and a direct stimulus check just one time. So I think that we could have solved this better, but
a one-time direct stimulus check followed by a huge bailout to corporations couldn't have been much worse.
It's perverted the corporate bailout. But so just to research the issue, I was like, I talked to my landlord. I'm like, hey, we have money for rent, but we're also my income's been affected by Corona. I was just wondering, what does this look like? And she was like, well, I'll send you a form. I'll send you a form, and then you can request a rent relief. And I was like,
is the relief genuine relief, or is it just a deferment? I mean, is it forbearance or deferment?
Yeah, so I didn't go into that. I'll just tell you a couple of the elements, but I'm concerned that these types of conversations are being had with a lot of people. So so she had sent me the deal, but then she also said that I needed a note from my employer that I had been laid off. And I said that I worked for an employer because the hardware store was deemed a critical business. And I said that, obviously I'm running for Senate or whatever. I just wanted to see how this conversation would go because my daughter actually worked for the hardware store and decided to self-isolate. And because the problem is you have employers, grocery stores and hardware stores that don't have a 6-foot distancing protocol in place. They have hundreds of people that are going through the stores every day. And if an employee decides to self-isolate for the protection of themselves or their family, I believe that they should qualify for unemployment benefits. But if you look at the unemployment benefit guidelines, those people,
not so much.
Yeah, so it's just another example of when we think that employers are altruistic enough to handle the needs of people. I think that's a problem. Or the overloading of uninsurance benefits or unemployment insurance hotlines. So people are just
all of which is
struggling.
obviated with a basic income.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's especially in this times, I think that was an irresponsible model to put 900 pages out there and not get people. I was thinking that there was probably a responsible, like a federal freeze on debt service, and
That would be
rent
good.
obligations that could have just went out there and solved a lot of problems, at least in the first 4 weeks. So
You're absolutely right. They could have and still could do all of those things, but all of those things should have been done in conjunction with a basic income. This one-time payment isn't going to help anyone do anything, even
yeah,
if it covered your bills for the month. Just
yeah,
yeah, magical fantasy world where $1,200 made you good for the month.
yeah,
You're not going to blow it all on those bills. If you
yeah,
know there's no check on the other side of it, yeah, you're going to hunker down. You're
yeah.
going to, or at worst case scenario, you do, and then next month what?
Yeah. So as potential federal legislators, what I would like to do is maybe we could talk about the preparations of our communities and the resilience against the next public health crisis, probably fund some of our infrastructure, strategic reserve for some of these medical assets, and then a proposed economic stimulus model that actually includes, if the economy ever does this, then we are direct payments to the people and then corporations have to go to the people to get their money.
We can push some policies too. For example, down in Vegas, they're doing a good job with their social distancing and their numbers are showing it.
Right.
But you know how they're doing the social distancing with the homeless?
How?
They're drawing 6-foot square boxes in parking lots and staggering these people. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of empty hotel and motel rooms.
Yeah. My God. So we have to treat homelessness really seriously. So like there's a couple of structural solves as far as like the types of housing structures that we'd make available. I think that we need to start talking about opening up public and federal lands to do some low-income housing developments or something like that. That would at least provide everybody a comfortable place to stay long term. But
I would ask that you consider a couple of things.
mm-hmm.
One, I would like to change the discussion away from the concept of low income housing. There are people who cannot or should not or will not ever be anything more than a minimum wage employee.
Uh-huh.
And if we don't make a world that accommodates them, then it's
you caught me using the wrong terminology, and I apologize.
Okay.
So here's what I envision, right?
All right.
I envision a world in which we all care whether somebody has a safe place to sleep. Right.
Perfect.
And and with that sort of altruistic goal, then we start looking at these housing models, and there's a lot of things we can do with design and use of resource and use of land that I would say with UBI, that would probably be the most fundamental thing that could eliminate or substantially reduce homelessness. But I have
also too, if you've got a UBI, you're going to find people moving all the way into the middle of the country where rents are the lowest and where people where density.
Well, I think Nevada and Montana, there's some good locations that people we could build the futures of tomorrow or cities of tomorrow in some of these places. Nevada's like got a lot of open space, you know.
Nevada's like 84%. I'm going to get that number right or wrong. Federally owned lands.
Yeah, and Montana's like 75 or something like that. But
as opposed to, you know what Texas is?
What?
Less than 4%.
Wow. Did you know they have just a huge infrastructure problem with drinking water that I would like to propose some solutions to? And your desalination might be right there. You know, Absolutely. They wouldn't even have to run a pipeline over the Sierras like you would, right?
It's got to be top down for this kind of stuff, because you can look at what they did with the EPA as a perfect example. I'm pretty sure we can agree that like the Cuyahoga River should not catch fire. I mean, these are things that should not happen.
Yeah, that was bad. When these things happen, that is bad. Yeah.
But when you take funding and control away at a federal level, and then say you, the states, are now in control of your states, it sounds like you're empowering states, and the typical conservative states' rights argument is really easy to fly that flag. But what you've now done is you've opened up an opportunity for exploitation, because states aren't nearly as rich as an awful lot of the businesses that come into those states.
Well, you see that in Montana quite a bit. So there's a lot of political power, like with every vote in Montana, and it's relatively cheap, and And so what we allow ourselves to do is be swayed by political influence and advertising.
Yeah.
And
How the hell
then,
did Bloomberg get 10%?
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, let's educate the American electorate together. Let's bring back democracy to the people. Hoorah! Yeah, so that's what we're doing here. I think it's building a coalition, 10.5 million voters. People need to know in Montana. People need to know it in Nevada, and let's just keep pushing the message. I think that the more we build support for the long-term models for democracy, I'm gonna probably get lynched for saying this, but even like AOC and a couple of those people that came in the last cycle, it's kind of inspirational to see some of the things that happen when we have some more independent voices come to the front of the conversation. So
it's independence from money. It ultimately is what it boils down to. It's the money in politics. You can look at how they vote. The leadership on both sides say yes to war. They say yes to deregulation. They say yes to continuing our horrible healthcare system, no to raising the minimum wage. It's the same across the board. And it's right in line with the political interests of who donates to them.
Can we agree that we're going for universal basic income versus minimum wage?
If you give me an adequate UBI, I'll let you do away with the minimum wage entirely.
Nice.
Get your libertarian tails wagging right.
Yeah. Would you let me allow employers to pay people in fun jobs like jobs that people would self-select into
exactly
less than what the current minimum wage is?
Precisely my argument for a universal basic income, because all that stuff I volunteer to do, somewhere between total volunteer work and something that has a commercial product that pays well enough to be able to have employees, there's stuff that's worth doing but doesn't have a commercial model that fits.
So just to be clear, so everybody hears us, I think we just called for a potential solution to abolish the minimum wage.
Oh yeah, yeah. And you're talking to a guy who, get this, right? The minimum wage was created in 1938. It has been raised 22 times. It has been raised year over year. It has been nearly doubled on one occasion. And every single time someone has brought up the idea of raising the minimum wage, pearl clutchers have come out of the woodwork and talked about how it'll be the end of jobs for the little guy. It'll be end of competitiveness for small business. It'll be end of competitiveness for the U.S. abroad. And every single time they've been wrong. So until such time as we've got an adequate UBI, I'm not walking away from raising the minimum wage, but I will consider raising.
So you're saying that one first. The only thing I would say with the minimum wage is that we have a lot of big industry that provides service level jobs that are getting disproportionate amounts of profit for displacing some reasonable jobs that previously existed. So unless we start to
tax base, right? Back when we had nice Keynesian economics, we used to tax those profits, and they were incentivized to put it back into plant, equipment, and personnel.
Well, I think we definitely have to make sure that we have an appropriate and responsible tax model, and then responsible spending. I would like to see
Amazon
more.
Should pay something, right?
Oh, Amazon should. Well, the system and the economics, just so we're talking about it, the system of economics that allows Amazon to be a $1 trillion company, we need to take through their different budget lines. And so it's not just waiting till it gets to Jeff Bezos. Right. It's waiting all these points of interactions with Walmarts, with Amazons, with these different organizations. I think that's why we need to look at the value-added tax. And then I think that even using tax as a regulatory tool is something that we underexplore, and we might be able to open up if we have some more honest voices in the conversation. So
yeah, well, I have a degree in economics and finance from UNR, and I'm pretty fond of the idea of modern monetary theory. It seems to play out pretty well, and you can look at Japan and their quadrillion yen in debt and their enviable standard of living, and I'm pretty convinced that debts and deficits don't matter until you want to use them as a political talking point. There's so much evidence to suggest that it's not how you spend it, or it's not how much you spend, it's how you spend it. Public debt is private profit. And if you spread that profit around amongst your populace, then it makes more sense. But when you dump it all into a bunch of weapons contractors and then go literally blow your money up, you've done nothing of value with it.
Yeah, we're a little bit far off of the spectrum of where we can take the political voices like in this cycle. But yeah, I mean, I got a B in macroeconomics. I think I can hang a little bit in this one.
Yeah.
But
Econ 262, guns and butter. We'll get the.
No, I loved micro. It was just
Yeah.
sitting there like watching demand curves just move left and right, and it's pretty exciting. But then when you start to live through life, you realize that some of the fundamentals that we talk about in economics have been in wrong. So I really like what the economists are doing now, just as a research profession. Is I think that level of science is teaching us quite a bit. So I think we should all hug an economics, hug a person who has a degree in economics. But yeah,
from 6 feet away or through proper PPE.
Yes, yeah. Well, later, a couple months later. So,
assuming a couple months is enough.
Yeah. Okay. So we do need to start having the rational conversation right now of developing public health safety protocols from this disease, because there is a long-term risk of re-exposure, especially if we don't effectively quarantine in this time. I mean, if we all stood still, the virus would play itself out of the population very shortly. But
there's two critically American things that prevent that.
Yeah.
One is if the government told you to lock yourself down, you'd be like, but my guns and my freedom, and I'm going outside. Couple that with a healthcare system that is not ready to take on the risks that are in front of it.
Yeah, so we definitely need to do some shoring up after this. But I think that people need to prepare themselves that we're going to have to take long-term precautions. But I do think that there are responsible models of even producing in this time, transportation in this time. I think that we can develop the protocols to keep people safe, but to keep our critical parts of our economy moving. But it's kind of an interesting thing, and I don't know, since you have a degree in economics, how this works. So if we were to all stop working, but debt stops, what would be the problem? Like, what if we froze the time value of money for 2 months?
I don't know that we could do that because we're global. We would have to do it everywhere. Right. So the thought experiment kind of falls apart because we'd have to get everybody on board. And I don't think I could pull that off.
You just don't think we could build an international safety protocol?
But we don't need to approach it from the idea of shutting it down. Come back to UBI. As long as you've got the cash in your pocket, those bills can come in and you pay those bills. I mean, every rich person thinks they're contributing to the economy and they've never punched a time clock. Every retired person believes and is rightfully believing that they contribute to the economy and they no longer punch a time clock.
That's true.
So if the robot's doing your job, but you're still getting the check and you're still using it to go to Baskin and Robbins and order your Amazon and pay your power bill, what broke?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what broke. The guy that built the robot makes a little bit less money.
Yeah.
And I really don't give too much of a shit about that.
Well, I think that people need to understand this too, because like when you're let's just look at trucking costs for a second. So like per truck mile, there's already on board a certain amount of labor cost per truck mile. And if you're replacing that with an automated truck, that labor cost per truck mile goes down. And then what we'd be proposing as taxes is still a net gain for the overall cost per truck mile. So like a lot of these things, there's an economic or a tax resource that we could add on to these things with actually still allowing prices to go down.
Look at all the times that big business has turned to we the people to bail them out. They love socialism at a macro level, right? Yeah. We can take that same socializing efforts to prop up big business in a way that actually benefits us by using those tax dollars to retire those workers that no longer have to do those jobs. It's still the same benefit because if we the people pay that retired wage, it's not a burden to that company. That company just knows that it's got a robot doing the job now. So they get to see their bottom line improve. And of course, we'll tax the living hell out of their profits like we're supposed to. And everybody gets to win. They get to think that their costs of doing business are going down because they are. The person that used to have that job is now gainfully employed doing something else or not at all. Everybody wins. And that's the part that they hate because it's not enough that they win. We must also lose.
Yeah. So I look at it this way. So I was involved in a lot of industrial engineering projects in Nevada. So I apologize to your voters that I might have put out of work. But So what I saw was that if you're doing like a repetitive, just time and motion studies, for example, and you've just got a repetitive task, like, move this from here to there, you can calculate that. Like, so I used to operate a production plant that was a 7-shift model or 21-shift model, 52 weeks a year. And so that repetitive task, I've supervised it for an entire human lifetime. And
then you break it down by either job cost or order cost or process.
So if you think about like what we're doing economically, like some of these small motions, like we're dedicating an entire human lifetime to like a belt transfer or, a pick and place operation. And there's no way that we can say as a society that is something that we want to perpetuate long term.
Unless it's someone that wants that job, in that, let's say, for example, you're doing something that is to you mindless. Let's say you're a clerk
building a table or something. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking specifically that you were a clerk at a government office that takes in applications for patents. And it's kind of mindless, so you can then go explore your other thought experiments and ultimately become, bigger projects. Or maybe you just want to put earbuds in and listen to Joe Rogan for your workday. And I don't want to take away the job if the job provides value and dignity and purpose for a person. But if the job sucks, or if no one wants it, or if it's not worth what it costs, then by all means, put a robot in there.
Yeah. Well, what I would find is that if I took like a production model that say it was originally set up to have like 18 people in it, you take it down to 6, you pay those people more. And then they're doing more high value tasks like
more cerebral,
machine level operators. You're putting them into a preventative maintenance role instead of just a physical labor, just catch this product. And these people, so the overall happiness of the workforce increased too. So I think that, I think that there are responsible models to use less people with happier people that are being paid better. So.
Yeah, and it's I keep coming back to the idea of we the people just retiring those obviated jobs, because that's the fear. It's that I need a paycheck. And almost nobody is in a job because that's the job they grew up wanting. It's because that's the job they qualified for, that was available, that pays the bills.
Oh yeah, it's a random crapshoot, like our economics of life. I think it's something like 80% of where you were of your economic outlook in life depends on where and how you were born.
It's something like you've got less than a 1% chance of making it into upper middle class if you were born poor.
Yeah. So definitely we got to change that, start tumbling this thing around. So, all right. Well, I think we're going a little bit long on time. So hopefully a lot of people, we just got like 32 million people to just like pay attention to what's happening in politics in the United States of America in a responsible way. But thanks for doing this. Let me know let me know what else we should talk about.
I look forward to catching up with you again in the near future.
Okay.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks.